I'm now joined by our special guest, climate activist and environmental scientist, Laurie Young. So welcome to you, nice to see you. What do you make of what's going on?
I mean, it's the final day. It's really quiet inside the blue zone here.
It's the final day. We said that yesterday.
I hope it's... I've run out of socks, so it better be the final day. I am hopeful that we get it done today. I hope that the reason we've extended this kind of final plenary, this stock take, is that because we're just that close. I really hope that's why we're here. I don't know, though. I kind of disagree with what's been said about agreeing that this could be classed as a successful COP, because I think the unofficial mantra was to keep 1.5 alive. And I don't think we are going to do that this time round. So I don't know if we can class this as successful in the way we have seen just now.
Certainly some of the analysis of the current targets and plans that have been put out by countries in their NDCs, their nationally determined contributions, take us beyond 1.5, don't they? But the point that Tom Clark was making was that they have put into this document, if it's agreed, that countries should come back in just 1 year's time, not wait for 5 years, and that keeps the prospect of reducing the temperature further still in play.
I think it's important, though, to say that prospects and more commitments and kind of targets have got us to where we are today, which is we are already sitting at about 1.2 degrees of warming. And think of all of the many people we could name who have stood up and had speeches about the impacts their countries are facing already. And every point of a degree is important. And we are currently shooting well over 1.5. And that's just not good enough. It's not good enough. And when you think about this is the decade that we really need to make the big action. And an extra year is a tenth of the next decade. And, you know, it's really important that we get that down. And I think that's why we need to be pushing in this next hour or a few hours to be making that change rather than saying it's good enough to come back next year. Because at Madrid, we said it's good enough to come back at COP26, and then we've come back and it's still not good enough. So we need to end this cycle of just saying, we'll get it next year, and actually fix it this time round.
And Laura, this is the scene now in the plenary hall. Everyone not back in yet, and I guess it is still quite early. There's 10 minutes before that rescheduled start time of 2:30, but we will keep an eye on it. And you talk about the targets. Perhaps we should remind people why 1.5 is so important. We keep talking about one of the goals of this summit is to cap global warming at 1.5 degrees above pre-industrial levels. Why does that matter so much?
The simple answer is we know that the world has been warming, and the numbers that we reference are since pre-industrial time. So right now we're at 1.2. That means the world has warmed. I'm from Glasgow. A little bit of warming here doesn't seem like a bad thing. But actually around the world, when the world warms, we see catastrophic impacts. More flooding, less rain, droughts, extreme weather events. And so as we near towards 1.5, that's when the science has been done to kind of model what might happen. Beyond 1.5, we start to see extreme droughts and extreme floods, more extreme weather. We see more people being pushed back into poverty because of food insecurity, and even climate refugees having to move around the world because of this. And the science is really clear that at 1.5, it's going to be bad, and anything beyond that is catastrophic. And it's not just 1.5 to 2 or 2.5, but actually every degree is exponential with the kind of things we're going to experience. And we know that right now at 1.2 it's bad enough, but 1.5 is really where we need to cap it. And obviously the Paris Agreement, another thing we referenced to, that's where this 1.5 number became solidified in our minds. And so we need to be keeping to that, which was agreed at COP21.
And Laura, there back in the room is the US climate envoy, John Kerry, continuing discussions ahead of this stock-taking session. It's been really interesting to see how he's moved from huddle to huddle. Clearly, there are some outstanding concerns here. But some people who are saying that this document is stronger than they had thought it would be would point to the fact that there is a mention there about the phasing out of coal and also of certain fossil fuel subsidies, inefficient fossil fuel subsidies, I think is the terminology. That has gradually got watered down very slightly, but it is still in there. And they say that is significant because, surprisingly, that's unusual.
Yeah, I think it was actually really surprising to realise fossil fuels had never really been mentioned in such a black and white way before in these discussions, which to me is bonkers. You know, we're on COP26 and that's it, just got in there. But I think, as you've said, there's a really great analogy looking at what draft number 1 said, what it said in draft number 2 and what it now says in draft number 3. And we actually went from a really strong, we need to phase out coal and we need to basically stop fossil fuel subsidies to now this really watered down language of unabated coal, inefficient subsidies for fossil fuels, and it leaves a lot more room for interpretation, and it feels a little more leaky, and it feels like...
But it's still there.
It is still there, but is it enough? We know that we cannot do any more new extraction of fossil fuels. That's one of the things that the science has been telling us, and this leaves a bit of room for that to still happen, and it's just not far enough in the opinion of many people who are at this conference.
Well, there are countries like China who say we still rely on coal at the moment for our energy, but we have plans to peak it, and then it'll start reducing. And there are other countries who say we just need it to keep the lights on for the time being.
That's where climate finance is really, really important, particularly for the developing nations of the world. And that's one of the other things that we haven't managed to achieve at this COP. The $100 billion a year that was pledged in 2009 still hasn't been made up. And that's the critical finance that will help many developing nations make that transition. We've obviously seen some good stuff with fossil fuel investment overseas come out. That was one of the things we got on Energy Day, feels like years ago, but just last week. And actually that's the stuff we need to see more of. But climate finance is something we still haven't got to, and that solves some of those problems and helps bridge that gap. And again, loss and damage, another part of that, meaning countries can spend money on that, but also on their transition to more renewable, clean and green energy sources.
And loss and damage is all about those vulnerable countries who are already suffering from climate change right now, being compensated for some of the damage that's already been done. And some of the richer nations concerned about that because they think they could end up writing cheques forever if they agree to that being in the text. But it is in there, isn't it?
Yeah, it's in there, but it's not enough. It's not a strong enough entry. But I would probably challenge any richer nation that says that, because actually this week, I really had the privilege to sit down with Nicola Sturgeon, First Minister of Scotland, and faith leaders from around the Global South to moderate a meeting around loss and damage. And she said something really powerful. She said, this is the debt we owe to you, because actually the money that we owe them, to put it bluntly, is actually us kind of paying reparations for the development we've managed to do on the back of many other countries. We've used up all of our emissions and managed to have impacts around the world, but we're sitting here in a lovely, developed country, and it's actually about paying the debt that's owed to them, rather than feeling like you're paying out cheques as some sort of favour.
Alok Sharma is now in the room. He's not taking his seat yet. He's got about 4 minutes until the rescheduled start of this stock-taking session. So he's surveying the room. It looks half empty to me, doesn't it? Yeah, there still seem to be talking in the corridors and the other rooms of the conference. So to me, it looks like that's not going to restart on time.
Everyone's probably getting a coffee. I think they close at 3.
They close at 3?
I had to run and get a coffee before this.
Well, that's something we'll have to talk about off air. That's outrageous. So, yeah, Alok Sharma is making his way off the stage once again. So is that an admission of defeat on the start time, at least? But to continue the conversation about finance, there's one other issue around adaptation. I mean, this is really important, isn't it? This is for developing countries to build up their resilience against climate change and rising sea levels, which could have a huge impact, particularly on island states where many of their cities are on the coastline, for example. And again, there's been movement. There's been talk of the doubling of the fund for adaptation. Is that good news?
It is good news, but again, we need to be continually taking further steps. And I think it's good to be able to push that, and we need more from different richer nations to be really pushing to go beyond that, because ultimately, as we've seen, we didn't get to the 1.5 kind of target that we needed to, which means there's ultimately going to be more adaptation needed as we continue to have large carbon emissions over the next few years. And that's why it's important for the world leaders who have made big pledges to loss and damage to continue to get more finance for that. But it was a really good thing to see coming out of it.
OK, well, Laurie Young, really interesting to get your take on developments so far. Thanks very much indeed.